Welcome to the Boulder City podcast. We're here in my backyard in Boulder City, and we're here with Gene Widner. Everybody knows Gene is the owner of Boulder City Social, the go-to news source for our town. But we're here for a very special reason. Gene has written a book called The Adoption Paradox, and she's here to talk about it. And we're excited to have an author of this caliber in our town. So, Gene, thanks for joining us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's really special to be here and to get to chat with you about this. So thanks so much for giving me this opportunity.
Great. Well, I read the book and I was flabbergasted at how good it was. I know virtually nothing about adoption. I know a few people who were adopted, but I thought they're just regular people. But after reading the book, I realized there's a lot more to the adoption paradox than anything else. And what struck me is that it's such a great title because it's such a paradox. There's so many different views of of adoption, and there's just a lot of ways you can approach it. So let's start with your story. You were adopted, and you seem to be a very, very normal person to me. But as I got into the book, I realized there's a lot of levels here.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, is anybody normal, first off?
Right, that's true.
I think that's sort of a misnomer.
Yeah.
But no, I was born in 1965. I have what is a really common adoption story, really, for my era. Born in 1965, my mother relinquished me because she was unwed at that point in time and had gotten pregnant by her boyfriend. She was actually from North Dakota and was sent away all the way to Washington State and was put up in a Salvation Army hospital for unwed mothers, which again was very typical at that time. There were maybe thousands even of those types of places throughout the U.S. back then, because our culture would not readily allow an unmarried woman to keep a child out of wedlock. So if a young couple found themselves in that circumstance, they either got married or she relinquished the child. So that was that story. And, again, I'm very quintessential for that time. I was born in April. I was fostered for a couple of months. And then George and Mary and Kelly, my parents who raised me, adopted me at that 2 months of age. And that, we thought, was the end of the story.
Right, sure. Yeah.
That's what everybody thinks. You bring home this baby and all is right with the world. And it sort of was. It sort of was, and it sort of wasn't. My dad was a school psychologist. My mother was a registered nurse. They were very stable. They were very well educated, and I know they loved me, and I them. And then we get into the slightly different things. We get into the issue that, unfortunately, my mother did have some complications in that she was already very thoroughly addicted to prescription drugs and alcohol by the time they brought me home. And so that created a lot of confusion and a lot of disconnect for me as a child, because the person I'm supposed to be bonding to, which is my mother, isn't available for me, and I don't know why. And then you get into this fact where I am adopted, and that just sort of complicated everything so much as I grew. I looked like my parents. That was very typical. They would actually match people based upon their genetic heritage and familial heritage to hide the fact that an adoption had happened. So I looked like my parents, but I didn't.
Right.
I had completely different aptitudes than them. I had different physicality, a different energy level, that's for sure. And I mean, again, it was that growing up being told that I'm lucky and that I'm special and that I'm wanted, and feeling that in some ways and yet not others. And that was painful when I was young.
Sure.
And then trying to navigate my way through my teen years, which is no fun for most of us.
Exactly, yeah.
Again, it's like you're just sort of, we talk about layers in adoption, and it just sort of piles on, and it becomes more and more complicated as you age.
Right.
So
Were you an only child?
I was an only child, so yeah, there was that dynamic there too.
That makes a difference as well, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, siblings, I think, provide, if nothing else, a reality check for each other. But also, unfortunately, I know a lot of stories where you have like all the siblings were adopted,
Right.
or you have siblings blended in with natural children, and that can create situations of otherizing each other.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Which can happen in natural families too.
Right,
There's
yeah,
we
exactly,
call
right, yeah.
we have the phrase that there's a black sheep of the family for a reason.
Oh, yeah.
What's weird is, of course, if that person happens to be adopted, you
Right,
know, then
yeah.
that's maybe a little bit less fun for them.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So they told you then that you were adopted. You knew that from an early age.
Yeah, I grew up knowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there are parents that we'll get into that later. But I want to talk about the research, though. I mean,
Sure.
I thought this was going to be a touchy-feely book, but you did a ton of research. I mean, at the end of every chapter, you have pages of citations, and it just must have been very difficult. So, how long did it take to write this book?
It took about 3 years. And one of the smartest things that I did do is I realized pretty early on that in order to write the kind of book that I wanted to write, channeling my school psychologist adoptive father there, in order to really do what I wanted to do, I realized I was going to need help. Otherwise, it was going to take me a decade.
Sure, right.
And so I hired two lovely young women who were UNLV students, both of them psychology or psychology adjacent majors, and together, over the course of a year and a half, they helped me amass that really significant amount of study.
Yeah, yeah. There were so many incredible stories in there. I mean, you go back almost to the caveman and how adoption grew through the centuries. But you mentioned it's really, we're talking about adoption in the U.S. and there were some really horrific stories, like from the orphan trains of the late 1800s, where they just load these kids on and drop them off. Mostly they use them as workers, and then of course the terrible Native American incidents where they would take children from their tribal homes, bring them to these Carlisle schools of sorts, and try to whip the native out of them and make them just like the white man. And the stories are incredible there, and I know a lot about that even before I met this, because I know a lot of Native Americans from my work in gaming, and I've heard those stories through them. So how does that impact the way adoption is done today?
You know, these shadows carry forward, and it's a really hard pill to swallow when you realize that adoption's origins were really about how to manage wealth and how to manage labor.
Right.
And most specifically, the labor of children. And it's a very difficult pill to swallow, that it's never been about us.
Right, yeah.
The first time that you actually see, in any state statute that adoption is about, or supposed to be motivated by, or even infiltrated by the concern of the welfare of the child,
Sure.
is in 1951.
Really?
In-
that soon,
in Minnesota's third revision of their law. And so, yeah, I mean, the orphan trains, those stories do matter because they carry forward in terms of just our perception, I think, overall about the value of children. And it was really, in my opinion, I think the Depression had a lot to do with at least the attempt to equalize the idea that it was not okay to adopt a child for their labor, that there was inherent value in a human being that deserved to be loved and cared for and treated as an equal in their own home, or at least we attempted to start to do that at that point.
Yeah, I mean, even when the families had natural children, they had a lot of kids so they could work the farm and things like that.
Absolutely.
So these adoptees were just added on to that, I would imagine.
Correct. I mean, that is, that's the thing, is you have the very mixed results of the orphan trains. A lot of people do believe that it was an example of good Christian generosity and indeed saved the lives of, many children who may have otherwise perished.
Sure, right.
There's always been the attempt by many to use these processes for good.
Yeah.
And then there's the reality and the pragmatism of how they get practiced, and that's where we drill down and we lose our good intentions sometimes.
Right. absolutely.
Yeah.
So my favorite parts of the book were the stories of the adoptees and the adopters that you actually brought their voice into the book, and I think that really amplified your research. So how did you find these people? And you don't really give them full names. You give them a first name and a last letter. So how did you find them? What did you say to them to get them to talk to you?
Sure. I mean, I interviewed close to 100 people for the book. 58 of them were adoptees. About 20 of them were first parents or birth parents, is the natural parents,
Right.
and then another 30 or so were adoptive parents, and also other people who were sometimes just therapists, psychologists, activists in the space who didn't have that background. And the truth is, it was very easy to find people, and it was very easy to get people to want to interview.
Oh yeah, okay.
This is an underrepresented storyline out there in the world,
Yeah.
and people have things to say. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to have their stories validated. And when someone says, hey, will you sit down and share this experience with me, even some of the most incredibly hard ones,
Yeah.
some of the foster care alumni where you're talking about the horrendous things that they've maybe experienced,
Right.
and birth parents and the really unfair treatment that they historically received. Those people wanted to sit down and tell their story. So that was actually the easiest part.
Yeah, yeah. And you did such a great job, taking the quotes and just blending them into the narrative of the different chapters. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
So we just spoke about you knew you were adopted early on, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they were told they were natural members of the family, and then find out later in life. So what would you suggest now for people to who are in that situation that have found out later in life? How do you deal with that?
Oof. Get some help.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, if the sad thing is, if there's enough of you for an acronym, there's too many of you.
Right,
We
okay.
call them LDAs, or a late discovery adoptee. Another fact that has also been brought out through the commonality of DNA testing is a not parent expected, event. But or you have donor conceived people who are also
Right.
a part of this. If someone is experiencing that, the first thing I would say is get help from someone who's adoption informed or adoption competent. To adopting parents or anyone who is, looking at going down the path of using any of these faculties to build their family, you have to live in a place of truth, and you have to do that first. And I think, frankly, that means before you even adopt,
Right.
you need to start having really deep and honest conversations with yourself and your partner about how much biology matters to you.
Right.
And how do you want to frame, this is how we've adopted, this is how we've built our family. You have the responsibility as the adoptive parents to figure that out and to frame that up in a really kind, responsible, honest way.
Right. Well, you call that coming out of the fog, and it seems though as a gradual way would be a better way rather than learning when you're 35 years old.
Yeah, the thing about, that acronym, the fog, or the metaphor of the fog, is it applies to everyone in adoption. It doesn't just apply to adoptees.
Right.
Excuse me, that was something that I'd actually wanted to explore more in the book, but we ran out of space. But
It's 600 pages. Though. How'd you run out of space?
yeah, I know. It was actually longer.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But the thing of it is birth parents, after they relinquish, will live in sort of a necessary denial of how affected they are by that relinquishment process. And adoptive parents, too. I really have a lot of empathy for adoptive parents in particular if they've endured many miscarriages or lots of rounds of, IVF or other types of treatment to try to get pregnant and they can't. That longing to be a parent and the struggles that people have with infertility is very, very real. And that needs to be honored. And so they have to deal with their fog,
Yeah.
right?
Sure. Right.
That has been built up in their lives about how they've come to the point of becoming adoptive parents. And then adoptees, again, deserve to be raised in an atmosphere of truth and transparency and honesty about this is how we've decided to build our family, and this is how this works.
Right.
And then also birth parents, again, they've relinquished, they've lost something terribly profound that deserves to be honored.
Right, no question. So there's a lot of people who are adopted that have known they're adopted, and I don't want to say that normal word again, but they live their lives and they don't want to deal with I'm adopted. But what can they get from reading this book?
I don't know. Hopefully, the idea that it's complex and that there are things that may surface and change and shift throughout their lives. I mean, the thing of it is I was definitely one of those adoptees. As I share in my journey, my own personal journey is, I had an addict for a parent, right? So I sought help through Adult Children of Alcoholics and those offshoots of AA.
Right. Right.
My mother did begin her own journey to sobriety. And so any of my issues in terms of my own personal growth and development, my ability to have healthy relationships with other people, I always attributed back to that alcohol wound,
Yeah.
right? As I'm finally now having my own awakening and my own evolution through the fog and back out of it and into and out of it, is there's so much that was actually sitting underneath the surface that wasn't being appropriately or accurately addressed. And once I see that, it's like, oh, wait a minute, And I mean, the thing of it is there's some pretty meaningful science behind what we're saying. Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, that's been on the New York Times bestseller list for like 450 weeks or however long. I mean, so that's there because that's resonating. And they're talking about the fact that our nervous systems record trauma and that this stays with us. And so, I mean, there was one woman who I met who was an interviewee for the book. And, she, like me, would have said, oh, adoption doesn't affect me. And she came up to me. I saw her just a week ago, and she bounced up to me and she said, thank you so much. I never understood that I wasn't the only person who felt this way.
Yeah.
And I could see it in her.
Yeah.
It had helped her.
Yeah.
So I can go home now. I mean, that was the best thing ever.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll get a lot more stories like that. But the psychological problems that you talk about that adoptees have, things like rejection sensitivity, dissociative disorders, attachment disorders, eating disorders, all kinds of these things. I mean, it's just daunting. So how do people, get over these kind of things?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think, first of all, and again, and I don't mean to pick on that, we never get over things.
Yeah.
We don't get over things.
Sure.
We learn how to better cope and how to adapt and how to still thrive, maybe in spite of those things. And I think that, again, no adoptee, whether they're young or grown, wants to be pathologized. No one wants to be otherwise. No one wants to be, oh, well, it's because they're adopted. No one wants that sort of language to be thrust in particular on a child. And there needs to be real awareness among educators, among therapists, among adoptive parents that, listen, these are these statistics. Adoptees significantly overrepresent in, different psychiatric treatment. They do overrepresent in addiction treatment. There's some debate even going on, among the community. The currently cited statistic says that adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt or commit suicide than the general population. And I would say to you that number may be low. There's some new research that is emerging that puts it as low. So I would only just say that, again, it's a thin line between otherizing someone and being aware of the fact that, okay, this is real.
Right.
And we need to maybe be prepared to have an assist here.
Okay, great. So in a lot of adoptions, there's legal documents that say the adoptees can't find their birth parents. Do you think they have the right to find out who their birth parents are?
I think every person deserves to have access to some basic information about themselves. I think people deserve to know their parentage. I think they deserve to know their cultural roots. And I believe they need to have as much access as they possibly can to their accurate medical history. Medical science continues to evolve, of course, as we know, and familial heritage continues to become more and more important about decisions and information that any single one of us should have
Right.
as we especially move into the latter years of our life,
Sure.
but also when we're young.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No question.
And as adoptive parents, why would you not want to know the truth about your child?
Yeah. Well, but sometimes it's the birth parents that don't want their child to find them.
Sometimes, yeah. Again, it's complicated
Right.
and it's paradoxical.
Yes, very much so. Right.
We have this living, breathing reality that most adoptions until the mid 90s were closed, right? So I'm coming from the closed era. My own birth mother has indeed not wanted to have contact with me. I found her. I'm glad that I found her. I still do not know who my biological father is. That is still a mystery right now to us. What we say is you have the right to the information, you don't have the right to a relationship. And that's true whichever way we're talking
Sure.
about.
Right. Right. No question. So I found this phrase and this period fascinating, the baby scoop. Tell us what that was and when it kind of faded away.
Yeah. So the baby scoop in America is noted as being between World War II up until 1973, which is when Roe v. Wade was passed, and it was also in 1972 that birth control became widely available and legally available to unmarried persons, even in the United States. The scoop era actually was a worldwide trend. It wasn't just the United States. Because again, remember, it's the end of World War II. You have the baby boom happening anyway.
Right, sure.
Right?
I'm a baby boomer.
Exactly. And so that's the baby scoop era where you have more adoptions that happen during that point in time than any other in history. And again, it was the United States, it was Canada, it was Australia, it was Europe, it was throughout the United Kingdom. It was in all of these major parts of the world. So, and it ended because of, again, access to better information, birth control, and all those things.
Okay. So for years, the international market was a fertile market for adoptions. People would go to Eastern Europe, China, all around the world. That's been reduced quite a bit in recent years, but it's still active. Tell us how you suggest people would navigate that. Because
Don't.
it's still happening, right?
Don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is one of the things that I do call for at the end of the book is I just do say that I just don't really know that we can promise that international adoptions are ethical right now, and maybe ever have been. I think that, we have these processes that have been put in place that I think have good intentions behind them. I mean, I explore, the roots of international adoption, which really was South Korea at the end of the Korean War.
Right.
That country was in really bad shape.
Yeah.
And you did have a lot of forces coming to bear that caused all of that to happen. You also have, unfortunately, there's a lot of opportunism that happens in that, again, we have this demand. We have lots of people who want to be parents
Sure,
and
right.
who can't naturally, or who have decided that they want to adopt internationally because they believe that they're doing good works and trying to help people who are impoverished and in much more difficult circumstances for that. It's tough to say, but the truth is that unfortunately we know that children have been trafficked,
Yeah.
and we know that they've been trafficked for centuries.
Sure.
We know that there are some pretty dire statistics about current international trafficking. The hard pill for me even to swallow as I was doing the research is the idea that children have been trafficked in the name of international adoption. And that's really hard to face up to.
Right.
Because I don't think that domestic well-intended parents have necessarily done anything inherently evil or wrong.
Right.
But I don't know that you can just trust all of these pressures and conflicts on the ground. And we have a situation that I'm not really sure that we should sustain.
Right. Well, we've seen these adoption agencies over the years, advertise, we'll get your baby, and they charge you tens of thousands of dollars to do it, and you really don't know where the baby came from. They'll tell you something. But so, are there any legitimate agencies that are ethically operated at this point?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are. And again, I always want to try to say this in my book is I know that there are individuals out there who are doing good work, who are genuinely well-intentioned, who are working for ethical nonprofit agencies, who are trying their best. The problem is, I think it's so hard to discern who those are from the others.
Okay. Well, you mentioned earlier the foster parent situation. I mean,
Yeah.
I've always thought that was strange, that bringing in, just keep a kid for a while and then they move on, and you get paid by the state. So is that system broken? Do we need to address that to a major extent?
Our child welfare system is broken.
Yeah.
It is absolutely broken in every sense of the word. And I don't know what the answers are. I just know we need to start asking different questions than what we are. And I think, again, one of the things that I found, kind of one of those things that caught me flat-footed in my own research, and then as I continue to talk and speak to people about what needs to change is, if 70% of the children who are in the foster care system are there because of neglect, which is largely driven by poverty, and they're not in the system because they're being abused. They're there because people are struggling to provide resources for them. I think, again, we need to be asking different questions and reimagining this whole scheme in a better way. And I don't know what those answers are. And again, I'm quoting this to you like I'm some sort of an expert. I'm not. When I'm quoting that statistic to you, I'm quoting our own national directors of child welfare who are saying, we know we have a problem. We have a disproportionate number of children who are of color in the system, and we know that we have a disproportionate causal relationship to a lack of resources. And we know this to be true.
Right.
And so if they're acknowledging it, we need to acknowledge it in the general public, and then I'll try to figure out how to do this better. And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, no question. So nowadays we have, you mentioned three things, the open adoptions, the semi-open adoptions, and the closed adoptions. Explain what they are and how we're working our way through that.
Sure. I mean, open adoptions or semi-open adoptions were created they pretty much started to become common in the 1990s. They were initially sort of created, and I'm going to use this term sold in an uncomfortable way, to birth parents because, of course, imagine their lifelong anguish of relinquishment and then never knowing how their child fared. So you created the first level of openness where there was some initial contact, where a birth parent was able to choose who was going to receive their child. That amount of power is gigantic. And so it started there, and then you started to slowly increase levels of openness. Now you have that the closed era, which was no contact. You have the semi-open area, which is some open, maybe letters and cards. Then you have levels of visitation, and then you have fully open. And fully open is not co-parenting. But we've got 20 to 30 years worth of research that says if an adoption absolutely is necessary, that the more open it is, the better that is for the adopted child. And again, if we're going to try to actually approach this whole scheme from being child-centered, and that it's the welfare of the adoptees that should be directing everything, even if it can't be direct birth parents, if it's siblings, if it's kin, any extended grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever, that's better for the adopted child because they have some mirroring. They get some different ideas and understanding of their placement and the necessity of that.
Right. I've seen some movies where there's a pregnant woman and she's kind of shopping her baby around. She interviews potential adoptee parents, and that sounds kind of horrific to me.
That makes me creepy. I know again that there are good intentions driving a lot of what is happening, and I know that there are many people who are trying to make it better, and I would never again say to an expectant parent who's trying to weigh her options that she shouldn't be trying to make the best arrangement that she can. What I would say is that you run into problems where you have conflicting motivations that can create coercive situations where she's thinking she's making decisions that are in the best interest of her child, but may not actually be so.
Right. Especially if there's money involved.
Especially when you have money involved.
Right.
Yeah.
So, do you have some suggestions for people who want to adopt? What avenue should they go down? Obviously, the adoption agencies are fraught with danger, and I guess maybe some of the religious organizations involved.
I don't know that there's a good answer there.
Yeah.
I would just have to say to choose very, very carefully. And again, I would say that any couple who is pondering adoption should seek counseling first from an adoption competent therapist and really do their own work and really give themselves the grace and the time to make sure that they're really sorted away on this. Because if you're not, that's just going to blow back on you and your own family and your child,
Right.
And again, I'm quoting other adoptive parents here. I'm quoting Lori Holden, who has her podcast, Adoption the Long View. She do your own work, parents. She says it endlessly.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say, listen to her, listen to the other adoptive parents that I've interviewed, and the other ones who are out there writing books and talking about these things.
Great. Obviously, people who are involved in adoption in any way, whether it be for the birth parents or the adopters and the adoptees, of course. But I found I got a lot out of this book, not having been involved in any of that. And it makes you think. You talk about a lot of things like the blank slate theory, which is almost like a nature or nurture. Like a 2-month-old, your brain isn't even developed. So how come this stuck with you all these years? I mean, it was just I thought it was great. So do you hope that people who don't know anything about adoption will read this book?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I figured out pretty early on, once I realized what I was into, which did just keep evolving and evolving and evolving.
Sure, right.
I knew that I wanted to write a book that my own community would find, yes, I feel authenticated here, that this is legitimate and that this is really good stuff. But I also wanted to write a book that was accessible to the general public, that
Right.
someone like yourself would actually pick this up and read it and go, wow, I have a new view.
Yeah.
That's what I hoped for.
Yeah, well, it did it for me anyway. So give us a timeline of when the book is going to be released, and you've got a book debut at some point here in Boulder City. Give us all that.
Sure, we're so close. Right now, my tentative launch date for the book to be available on Amazon is on or around May 20th. I've already had pre-sales available on my website. You can still do that at adoptionparadox.com. That's for a physical copy of the book, which will be signed and shipped to you by me. And
Okay.
then I have my first of several appearances that will happen locally. I have a book launch party on May 31st here in town. That'll be at the Masonic Lodge. And
Okay.
then I'll have other, to be announced events upcoming,
I'm
both
sure you'll
online and local.
Be in the damn roast house with there are books in there. I mean,
Absolutely. I've already been talking to
I'm
Travis
sure.
and the gals.
Right.
So
well, that's exciting. So they can just go to Amazon right now, or
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
yeah, nothing
So
yet on
just go
Amazon.
to adoptionparadox.com if
Yes.
you want to order one now, and that will help you, I'm sure, as well.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Great. Well, Jean, thanks for joining us. I've wanted to do this for a long time to talk about this adoption, but I'd like to have you back someday and talk about Boulder City Social and what it means to the town and your and my impressions of living in Boulder City, because I think it's pretty unique, a pretty unique town.
It is. It's a special place. I'm really glad to get to call this place home. And heck, you and I wouldn't have met if we hadn't both moved here. That'd be fun.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks for watching our podcast.
Thank you so much.